Hi, this is Matt Baker. First off, I want to say I did not want to make this video, at least not yet. You see, I already made a family tree video about Kamala Harris 4 years ago, and although it could definitely use an update, I wanted to wait until after the election results to perhaps redo it. However, recently there's been a string of videos put out by Candace Owens that have been getting millions of views. In them, she insinuates a bunch of things about Kamala Harris's family tree that, quite frankly, are not true. But people are believing Owens and starting to repeat her claims as if they are fact. So, since Useful Charts is one of the main channels here on YouTube that talks about family trees, I felt that it was sort of my responsibility to weigh in. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go through Kamala Harris's full tree right now. I'll still do that later this year if she wins. But for now, I want to focus on her father's side of the tree and answer the question, is Kamala Harris black? The renewed interest in Harris's tree started with a statement made by Janet Jackson during a recent interview. When asked about Kamala Harris, Jackson said, and I quote, "She's not black. That's what I heard. Her father's white. I was told that they discovered her father was white." Now, first off, it's obvious that Janet Jackson has never seen a photo of Donald Harris, Kamala Harris's father, because there's no way that anyone would call this man straight up white. Here's some more photos of him at various points in his life. I mean, you could perhaps claim that he looks mixed race or maybe part white, but I don't think anyone in their right mind would say that the person you're looking at on screen right now is a white man. So, rightly so, the media jumped all over Jackson's comments. But for some reason, Candace Owens decided to defend Jackson by doing a deep dive into Donald Harris's genealogy. So let's take a look. First off, like I say, it's quite obvious that Kamala's father is a black man. Maybe not 100% black, but definitely black enough that that's how he's going to be perceived as he goes through life. Remember, race is just a social construct. What's actually more important is racialization, meaning how society perceives you and treats you based on how you look. So, for example, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, and Bob Marley all had white fathers, but all three of them were considered black, never white. Okay, let me introduce you to Donald Harris's parents. According to Donald himself, his father was Oscar Joseph Harris, and his mother was Beryl Christie Finnegan. However, in his article, Reflections of a Jamaican Father, Donald states that the two most influential women in his life were his two grandmothers, Christiana Brown and Iris Finnegan. Now, it's unclear whether or not he was actually raised by these two grandmothers, but that certainly seems like a possibility, because, as Candace Owen points out, there is no record of a marriage between Oscar and Beryl. However, there is a record of a marriage between Oscar and a white woman named Vioris Cambridge when Donald was 14, as well as a marriage between Beryl and a man named Lawford Newland when Donald was 6. So either Oscar and Beryl divorced very early on in Donald's life, or they were simply never married at all. Now, the first mistake that Candace Owens makes is that she claims that Beryl died in 1960. Based on this death registration here. If true, she says, that would mean that Kamala Harris is lying about this photo, which shows her with her grandmother Beryl in 1990. But here's the thing. Harris's grandmother didn't die in 1960. She died in 1995. This is the correct death registration. We know that this one is the correct one for several reasons. First and foremost is the fact that the Beryl on this registration is named Beryl Finnegan, which was the grandmother's last name, whereas the Beryl on this one is named Beryl Christie. Now, the reason why Candace got confused is because Harris's grandmother Beryl had Christie as a middle name. But the form asks for the full name. I think it's very unlikely that they would put the first and middle name rather than the first and last name. Also, this Beryl died in 1960 at the age of 39, meaning that she was born in 1921. Whereas this Beryl died in 1995 at the age of 81, meaning that she was born in 1914. That's a pretty big difference that can be settled very easily by looking at Grandma Beryl's birth certificate. Even Candace Owen admits that this is the correct birth certificate for Grandma Beryl. At first glance, it seems to indicate that the birth was in 1917, but that 7 could also be a 4, which would make it 1914, fitting perfectly with what we'd expect based on the correct death certificate. But there's more. Candace makes a big deal over this name here, Douglas Finnegan, the person who reported the death. She says, we don't know of any Douglas Finnegan in the family. Well, that may be, but her last name was in fact Finnegan. So it's not hard to imagine that there was some nephew or cousin out there named Douglas Finnegan who was in charge of reporting the death. In contrast, this one lists Muriel Murray. We don't know of any family members with the last name Murray. So that one makes even less sense. Finally, there's the fact that this Beryl died in St. Anne Parish, which is where Grandma Beryl was known to have lived her entire life, whereas this one has her being born in St. Anne but dying in Kingston. Now, the second mistake that Candace Owen makes is that she claims, or at least strongly insinuates, that Donald Harris's real mother is actually Vioris Cambridge, and that the woman in this photo is just the help that Kamala was passing off as her grandmother in order to seem more black. This is where things start to get really ridiculous, because Vioris was born in 1927 and Donald in 1938. So are we to believe that Vioris had Donald when she was only 11? Oh, wait, I get it. She wants to see Donald Harris's birth certificate, because obviously he's lying. Gee, that sounds familiar. What I think is really going on is that Candace Owens is just throwing out a bunch of crazy stuff because she knows that people who want a reason to hate Kamala Harris will believe it. But that's just plain irresponsible, to put it lightly. Look, I take family trees seriously, so let me show you what I've learned and what I think the best explanation is for all the facts. Let's start with Joseph Alexander Harris, Oscar Harris's father. He's the most recent fully white person on Kamala Harris's family tree. So out of her 8 great-grandparents in total, only one of them was white. That's actually about average for black people from the Americas. Then there's Oscar Harris's mother, Christiana Brown. She's the one that Donald Harris said was a descendant of Hamilton Brown, the Irish slave owner. But she's obviously mixed race, so what this means is that a white slaver probably impregnated an enslaved black woman at some point. Or at best, it means that a descendant of a white slaver married a descendant of an enslaved black woman. Either way, Christiana Brown had ancestors on both sides of the equation, and therefore it's extremely misleading to call her offspring the descendants of a slave-owning family without telling the full story. According to Donald Harris, Christiana Brown ran a dry goods store in a small town, so it's not like she was super wealthy or anything. I'm also not sure whether or not Christiana Brown was ever married to Joseph Harris. I'm still looking into it, but it appears that Joseph Harris had a white wife named Caroline Beckford, which means that Oscar was either the result of an affair or perhaps even something worse. What we do know is that Oscar's birth certificate lists him simply as Oscar Brown, with no mention of his father. So it definitely sounds like Christiana Brown was a single mother. Interestingly, Oscar didn't change his name to Oscar Joseph Harris until a few years prior to marrying Vioris, which seems to indicate that he was perhaps trying to distance himself from his black roots. If Joseph Harris was fully white and Christiana Brown was half black, half white, that would mean that Oscar Harris was 75% white. So he may have been able to pass. It does seem that Oscar and Vioris did have children together, children that would be the half-siblings of Donald Harris. For example, Candace Owens found this son, who is listed on Oscar Harris's death certificate as the one who reported the death. This means that if Oscar and Viola did have a bunch of white passing children, then Donald Harris might have been the black half-brother that no one really talked about. Now, I'm not saying this for certain. Donald has decided to keep these details private, and I respect that. I'm just saying that there's more than one way to do the guesswork. Now, while Oscar Harris seems to have been only around 25% black, it would appear that Beryl Finnegan was around 75% black. This is because her father, Patrick Finnegan Jr., was mixed race, and her mother, Iris Finnegan, maiden name Allen, was fully black. There's a record from around 1900 of a priest from St. Anne's Parish saying that there was a mixed-race couple in the area, and that the husband's name was Patrick Finnegan Sr., originally from Ireland. He was almost certainly referring to this couple here, the parents of Patrick Finnegan Jr. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that if Oscar Harris was 1/4 black and Beryl Finnegan was 3/4 black, that would make Donald Harris, DNA-wise, 4/8 black. Or to put it more simply, half white, half black. So that puts him in the same category as Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, and Bob Marley, as well as Drake, Lenny Kravitz, etc. So in other words, Donald Harris is black. And considering that he married an Indian woman, as in from India, that means that Kamala Harris is part black and part Indian, which is what she's always said. Sure, technically we could say that approximately 25% of her ancestry is European, 25% is sub-Saharan African, and 50% is South Asian. But when it comes down to it, that's not what matters. Like I said earlier, race doesn't really exist, but racialization definitely does. And the fact of the matter is that Kamala Harris has been racialized as either black or brown or both her entire life, never white. So there's your answer. Yes, Kamala Harris is black, and she's also Indian. You can be both. I'll continue to look into her tree, and if she wins in November, expect a video on her full family tree sometime before the end of the year. Thanks for watching.